The kind of bleak April evening Chicago was infamous for had rolled in. The wind, sharp and relentless, sheets of icy rain dragging streaks across the glow of the streetlights, turning them into hazy, trembling halos. Elliot Ward pulled his trench coat tighter around him as he climbed out of his Mercedes, rain pattering steadily off the brim of his fedora. The stormwater surged along the gutters, swallowing the curbs in frothy torrents. He took the steps up to his townhouse quickly, but the cold needled through his clothes. A deeper cold was already rooting inside him. Caroline's Lexus was nowhere to be seen. Elliot paused at the top of the stairs, rain soaking through the fine leather of his Italian shoes, a queasy knot forming in his stomach, confusion edging toward fear. She always parked in the garage by 6, without fail. They lived in Lincoln Park, an affluent, quiet part of the city. She didn't vanish on weeknights, not without saying something. Where could she be? His heart began to pound. He tried reasoning his way out of the panic. Maybe she got delayed by a client or ran a quick errand after work. She might have texted. He pulled out his phone and checked. Nothing new from Caroline since around 5 p.m. when she'd messaged, "Staying late at the office. Don't wait up. Love you." Elliot opened the door and stepped inside. The house was dark and still. Normally, Caroline would be playing mellow jazz from the kitchen while chopping vegetables, or she'd be curled on the couch reviewing architectural layouts on her tablet. But tonight, the silence pressed in like a vacuum. He flicked on the foyer light, loosened his tie, and took a deep breath. "She said she's at the office," he reminded himself. This could all be fine. And yet the unease had already taken hold, the moment he saw the garage empty. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor as he stood there, uncertain. Her message had come in at 5. It was nearly 8 now. If she was truly at work, why hadn't she come back for dinner? Or to grab a change of clothes? Late nights weren't unheard of in her profession, sure, but she had never told him not to wait up. That was something different, something darker. He moved into the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and studiously avoided looking at the Thai takeout he'd picked up for both of them, now cooling in its containers. As he took a sip, his eyes landed on the ceramic bowl near the microwave, the one where they kept spare keys. There it was, Caroline's backup Lexus fob catching the light. He set his glass down, an idea beginning to take shape. Last year, they'd swapped spare keys as a practical measure in case either needed to move the other's vehicle. But modern fobs weren't just keys anymore. They could interface with apps that tracked vehicle locations, updated fuel levels, and more. Elliot wasn't a tech wizard, but his work in private security had made him more than capable with digital tools. He remembered how Caroline had once shown off the car's companion app, beaming, "Look! It even tells me where I parked and how much gas I have left." If he could get into that app now, he might be able to see where her Lexus was. It felt invasive, but he couldn't shake the warning bells going off in his head. Something was off. With renewed purpose, he strode into the living room and picked up her iPad from the coffee table. She often left it there. His face ghosted across the dark screen as he hit the home button. No passcode. That was Caroline. Open, trusting. Or so he'd always thought. The Lexus app sat right on the home screen. He hesitated, finger hovering above it. Was he really about to track his wife like one of his firm's surveillance subjects? A flash of lightning lit the room, revealing the empty street outside the window. He tapped. A Logan prompt appeared. Frowning, he typed in her standard email, followed by a few familiar passwords. On his third attempt, her college nickname tacked with 123, he was in. The app loaded a map interface. A blinking icon marked her car's location. Elliot's heart slammed in his chest. Her vehicle wasn't anywhere near her company's downtown location. Instead, according to the GPS, it was stationed in a commuter parking lot off Sheridan Road, way up north, close to Evanston, several miles from the city center. Elliot's forehead creased in confusion. The Sheridan Road lot. What reason could she possibly have to be there? That part of town was mostly used by suburban commuters, people who parked there to hop on the L or Metra trains into Chicago. But Caroline almost never used public transit, and when she had meetings in that area, she usually just drove herself the entire way. None of this added up, not if she was supposed to be working late at the office. A cold sense of unease began to settle in him, like a gathering storm echoing the one raging outside his window. He looked again at the timestamp on the app. The car had been idle at that spot since 6:47 p.m. It had been sitting there unmoved for nearly 2 hours. Was she still somewhere nearby? If she'd hopped on a train, she could easily have made it downtown by now. But that led to another question. Why would she need to park out here if she was already working downtown earlier? A more likely explanation dawned. She parked here to meet someone. The thought left his throat dry and tight. Who could it be? A client who lived in Evanston? Maybe a friend? If it were something innocent? Why hadn't she just told him? Without another second's hesitation, Elliot reached for his coat, slipping his phone and a small flashlight into the pockets. His actions were swift and methodical, not the frantic scrambling of a worried spouse, but the controlled efficiency of a man returning to familiar instincts. Years in private security had etched certain habits into him that didn't fade easily. Even now, with dread clawing at his chest, he moved deliberately. He stopped by the narrow hallway table where they kept essentials, an old can of pepper spray, and, strangely enough, a compact digital camera from their vacation last summer. After a pause, he grabbed the camera too. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, but the idea of evidence, of documentation, felt suddenly important. The drive out to the Sheridan lot passed in a blur of rain-streaked windows and glowing brake lights. Thunder grumbled far above as he steered through waterlogged streets, merging onto Lakeshore Drive and heading northward. He gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, jaw clenched, pushing back the torrent of dark possibilities surging through his thoughts. Was Caroline in danger? Had there been an accident? Or worse, was she with someone else? He remembered her earlier text, "Don't wait up." There had been no warmth in it, no light-hearted quip, no playful apology for staying late. Just a directive, curt and impersonal. That wasn't like her at all. Usually, Caroline was thoughtful, even flirtatious when working late, sending him goofy memes from her studio or selfies holding late-night coffee cups with exaggerated expressions. But tonight's message had sounded like it came from a stranger. He tried her number again for the 5th time since leaving the house. 4 rings, voicemail, just like before. Still no answer. Still no return call. He hadn't left any voicemails either. Didn't know how to voice the spinning worry inside him. Earlier that evening, around 7 p.m., she had picked up once. She'd sounded rushed, distracted. Said she was still at the office, reviewing plans with her team. But there'd been an odd echo in the background. Not the close, quiet sounds of her design studio, but something more open, like a lobby or atrium. She'd ended the call quickly, saying she'd check in later. Now it was pushing 9 o'clock and she still hadn't called back. Elliot's nerves were fraying. By the time he approached the Sheridan Road area, the heavy downpour had lightened into a cold, misting drizzle. The commuter lot was mostly abandoned this late, a scattering of vehicles glinting under hazy orange streetlights. He turned off his headlights, creeping through the rows with quiet intent. It didn't take long before he spotted Caroline's sky-blue Lexus GS parked near the far edge of the lot, close to a lamppost. He recognized it immediately. The customized license plate reading Coraline one gave it away. Seeing the car made his chest tighten. It was parked properly, undamaged, and empty, so at least she wasn't inside. He eased his own car into a dark corner spot beneath a busted light, about 50 feet away. From here he had a clear view of her Lexus but could remain hidden in shadow. Raindrops ticked softly against the roof of his Mercedes as he sat still, watching, waiting, and bracing for whatever came next. Elliot cut the engine and glanced at the dashboard clock. 9:14 p.m. He took a slow, deliberate breath, attempting to steady the faint tremor in his fingers, still buzzing with adrenaline. Think it through, he told himself. Be rational. Caroline's car was parked here. If she had arranged to meet someone, perhaps they planned to leave together from this spot. Or maybe she caught a train and would be back soon to drive home. Could it be a late client meeting in the northern suburbs? He tried to believe it, tried to make it fit, but something in him pushed back hard. He knew her workload this week. They often chatted about her meetings over dinner, sharing little details. Nothing in Evanston had come up, he was certain. A faint flash lit up the distant clouds, briefly outlining the trees beyond the lot in sharp silhouette. Elliot rubbed at his eyes, fatigue battling with dread, and chose to stay put. 10 minutes slipped by, then another 10. Each passing second seemed to cinch his nerves tighter. Only the rain stirred, soft circles forming on pavement puddles, and now and then the quiet hiss of passing traffic on the road beyond. He reached for the door handle, intent on taking a closer look at her vehicle, when headlights flared across the lot. A black sedan turned in. Elliot instinctively lowered himself in his seat, cautious now. The sedan cruised through the open parking rows, ignoring all the available spaces, and continued steadily toward the back, straight toward Caroline's Lexus. His heartbeat kicked hard in his chest. The car eased to a stop directly beside hers. From his angle, he could just make out the license plate, an Illinois congressional tag, the low-numbered kind reserved for federal legislators. His breath caught in his throat. He knew that car. A black BMW with that exact plate belonged to Congressman Blake Wheeler. Recognition hit like a punch. 3-term representative, always on the evening news, slick and well-liked. Elliot had met him once at a fundraising gala with Caroline at his side. The congressman had entertained their table with breezy charm and polished stories. Caroline had later commented on how unusually grounded he seemed for a politician. Now that memory turned bitter in Elliot's gut. This couldn't be happening. Then, movement. A figure dashing through the drizzle toward the Lexus. Caroline. Even in the dim lighting, he recognized the familiar grace in her stride, the beige trench coat flaring at her legs as she hurried through the rain. She hadn't brought an umbrella, just held a leather portfolio above her head for cover. Elliot's breath hitched as she reached the Lexus. She smiled. Not the professional smile she gave acquaintances or clients. It was the other one, the soft, teasing smile that used to belong to private moments between them. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until his hands ached. Caroline didn't get into her car. She bent into the back seat briefly, retrieving something. An overnight bag, perhaps. Then she shut the door and walked straight to the black BMW. The driver's window slid down. Through the rainy blur, Elliot could just make out Wheeler's profile, his sharp jaw, the silver at his temples, leaning to open the door for her. Without pause, Caroline slipped into the passenger seat. Elliot sat frozen, a weight dropping into his chest like iron. His wife, getting into another man's car. Not just any man, a prominent congressman. There was something disturbingly intimate about the moment. It looked practiced, natural, as if it wasn't the first time. Wheeler's hand rested lightly on her shoulder before he pulled away from the curb. They hadn't seen Elliot. He was buried in the shadows of his seat, pulse hammering in his ears. For a fleeting moment, an overpowering impulse surged through him. To slam the gas pedal down, swerve into their path, and force a confrontation beneath the pounding rain, headlights glaring, horn blaring like a war cry. He pictured Wheeler's stunned expression, Caroline's guilt-stricken face. Imagined the stunned silence if he trapped their car, demanded explanations, made them face what they'd done. The pain cut through him like shattered glass, sharp, unrelenting, and filled with rage. But Elliot Ward had spent a lifetime mastering control. Years spent in the shadows of private security and intelligence had shaped him into someone who didn't act on emotion, someone who observed, gathered, waited. Charging in now would only alert them, give them a chance to lie, to bury the truth deeper. Number, not yet. If she was truly sleeping with Congressman Wheeler, a late-night ambush wouldn't bring justice. It might bring chaos, even regret, but not the truth he needed. And right now, justice was quickly replacing heartbreak as his most urgent need. With a composure that surprised even himself, Elliot raised his phone and snapped a photo. Raindrops streaked the windshield, blurring the frame, but the plates were legible. There it was, Caroline's Lexus, alone and abandoned. Wheeler's sedan pulling away with her inside. Evidence. Not a full picture, but a beginning. As the red glow of their taillights vanished into the night, Elliot finally released the breath caught in his throat. Rain intensified, hammering the roof in rhythm with his racing pulse. He set the phone down, strangely calm now, as if his fury had condensed into something colder, more precise. There would be no confrontation tonight. No emotional scenes in the downpour, no desperate explanations. Caroline had made her move. Now it was his turn. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the pain fully hit him, like a wound freshly reopened. The woman he'd built a life with, trusted for a decade, was driving off into the darkness with someone else. Not just someone, an elected official, a man who should have known the line he crossed. Humiliation lit a fire in Elliot's chest, but he didn't let it consume him. He let it harden him. Transform into something sharper, unbreakable, resolve. He opened his eyes again. From his jacket, he retrieved a compact digital camera, his backup. He checked the image. Blurry cars, an unremarkable lot. But the timestamp, the GPS coordinates, they told the story he needed. It wasn't damning on its own, but it connected them. He packed the camera away with care, then turned the ignition. As he rolled out of the parking lot, his eyes caught the rear view. There, under a flickering streetlight, Caroline's car remained. Alone. The realization hit hard. She likely wasn't coming home tonight. She had never done this before. Or had she? And he simply hadn't seen it. How long had this betrayal been unfolding behind his back? The questions came in waves, but he shoved them down. There would be time later to examine every lie. Now he focused on the road, driving steadily, deliberately, his thoughts as controlled as his speed. The truth could no longer be denied. But he refused to let the pain drag him under. Something else had taken root, quiet but firm. A plan. A strategy beginning to take shape slowly but with certainty, like pieces of a complex operation snapping into place. Caroline had shattered their marriage and family in one night. If he confronted her now, led with pain, she might cry, plead, offer hollow regrets. She might even manipulate him into letting it go. But Elliot wasn't looking for comfort anymore. He was preparing for consequences. Elliot had no plans to let her walk away without consequence. Certainly not with the life they had built together, pretending none of it had meant anything. As the glow of Chicago's skyline smeared past in rain-streaked smudges, he began compiling a mental dossier, what he already knew and what intelligence he'd need to gather. At his firm, his expertise lay in designing strategic defense systems, identifying weak points, collecting data, and executing calculated operations to eliminate risks. He'd orchestrated dozens of such maneuvers for influential clients. Now the operation was personal. Now the client was himself. The targets, Caroline Ward, once his wife, now a traitor. Blake Wheeler, once a respected congressman, now a willing co-conspirator. This wasn't just a matter of cheating. It was a full-scale deception, a tangled web of deceit that made a mockery of the trust Elliot had offered freely. A sharp, precise calm settled over him. This wouldn't be an emotional breakdown. This would be a mission, covert, thorough, and obliterating. As his Mercedes glided back through the damp streets toward Lincoln Park, the rain faded to a light drizzle. Midnight was near. Instead of pulling into the driveway of the home they once shared, Elliot turned into the lot of a nearby all-night pharmacy and killed the engine. His eyes drifted toward the glove compartment. Inside was a slim notebook he always kept for field notes. He opened it to a clean page. Under the dim orange glow of a street lamp refracted through rain-speckled glass, he began to write, sharp bullet points in his precise, slanted hand. 10:13 p.m. Photographic evidence obtained. Caroline entering Wheeler's vehicle at Sheridan Lot. Objectives. Map every known and hidden link between Caroline and Wheeler. Review timelines, messages, appointments, rendezvous. Secure access to Caroline's professional records, email, expense reports, digital calendar. Cross-reference with Wheeler's public schedule. Confirm overlap. Activate discrete contacts, FBI, ex-agents, legal allies, to expose the congressman's indiscretions. Retain legal representation. Begin quiet proceedings for divorce, protective orders if necessary. Lock down shared finances, property, accounts before initiating confrontation. He double underlined that last item. His hand clenched around the pen as he recalled the image. Wheeler's hand resting on Caroline's back. Fury surged, threatening to break through the surface of his control. The pen bit into the page, nearly ripping it. For many men, betrayal like this would bring collapse. But for Elliot, it sharpened him. If she thought she could sabotage their life, slip into a secret affair, and walk away untouched. She was about to learn just how mistaken she was. He closed the notebook with finality and drew a deep breath. This night, soaked in rain and revelation, had stripped his world bare. But it had also ignited something inside him. A mission had begun, and Elliot Ward would see it through, methodically dismantling the facade and the people hiding behind it. He stared north toward Sheridan Lot, eyes like sharpened ice. "Let's begin," he muttered to the silence around him, the soft percussion of rain barely covering the edge in his voice. Then he turned the key, pulled out of the lot, and disappeared into the night. His heart hardened, his mind already plotting the counterattack. Over the next 10 days, Elliot underwent a transformation. The grieving husband faded into a ghost. In his place emerged a tactical architect, quiet, deliberate, and relentless. Behind closed doors in his home office, headphones on, pretending to take conference calls, he stitched together the map of Caroline's duplicity, thread by thread, piece by piece. By day, he maintained the appearance of normalcy, answering calls at the private security firm, sounding calm and professional, even managing light conversation with coworkers. But when night came, Elliot became someone else entirely, someone with a mission, someone who would not stop until the truth and its consequences were laid bare. To uncover each falsehood, each clandestine rendezvous, every strand linking Caroline to Congressman Blake Wheeler, and be ready to dismantle the whole tangled structure in a single calculated blow. Day 1, post-revelation. The morning following that storm-drenched epiphany, Caroline crept back into their shared townhouse just as the sky began to lighten, no doubt assuming Elliot would still be fast asleep. He had made sure he wouldn't be. Clean-shaven, dressed, and seated at the kitchen island, he stared blankly at his laptop screen, a half-empty mug of coffee beside him, posing as if casually reading through emails. When the front door eased open at 6 a.m. and she stepped inside, Caroline froze mid-stride. A flash of something, guilt, lit her eyes, before she smoothed it away with practiced ease. "Oh, you're up already," she remarked breezily, removing her rain-dappled trench coat. Her hair still held the memory of last night's downpour, and she clutched the familiar leather folder. She'd used to shield herself from the storm. She looked worn out. Elliot lifted his gaze, schooling his features, into what he hoped passed as innocent surprise and quiet concern. "Couldn't really sleep," he said, faking a yawn. He watched the slight stiffness in her body, the defensive posture, and added, "Getting in just now? Everything all right?" Avoiding his eyes, Caroline turned to hang up her coat. "Yeah, the weather was awful and it got super late." A pause, brief but telling, then her voice resumed its rhythm. "I ended up staying over at Paige's place, downtown. You remember Paige, right? She's my junior on the condo project." She offered the explanation effortlessly, as if she'd practiced it the whole way home. "We were still at it after 10, working through those layout revisions. With the storm, I figured staying was safer than driving back." She gave a faint smile, watching his face for cues, like someone gauging how well the story was landing. Elliot's stomach turned, but he kept his expression even. He didn't need to lie. He had been worried. Just not for the reasons she believed. "You should have called," he said, his voice laced with genuine worry that wore a different meaning beneath. "I was concerned." She approached him, leaned in, and brushed a kiss across his cheek. Her skin was cold from the early morning air. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "My phone died, and by the time we wrapped up it was too late to bother you. I didn't want to wake you for no reason." She said it smoothly, with the confidence of someone who'd spun this tale before. Elliot nodded, pulling her in briefly, mindful not to recoil at the lie she believed he'd bought. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm just glad you're okay." Then, a beat later, he added, "Staying with Paige was smart. The roads were a mess." A storm of rage churned inside him, but his outward calm remained intact. He even managed a faint smile. "I left some Thai in the fridge if you're hungry." Relief flickered across her features, and she smiled more warmly now, a smile that, heartbreakingly, still hit him like it used to. "You're amazing," she whispered, giving his hand a grateful squeeze. Elliot kissed her forehead and mumbled something about needing to prep for a morning meeting. He left her there in the kitchen, reheating the meal she'd ignored the night before, still wearing the mask of the loyal, clueless husband. But once he slid into his car a few minutes later, after a soft goodbye, his jaw locked tight. Every fiber of his being urged him to demand an explanation, to raise his voice and yell, "How could you?" But he pushed the urge down. There would be a time for confrontation on his own terms. That day at the office, between delegating tasks for a cybersecurity inspection and enduring a series of conference calls, Elliot began digging, quietly. While eating lunch at his desk, shielded by his monitor, he began his investigation. He searched public databases and browsed social media, looking for any overlap between Caroline and Congressman Blake Wheeler. It didn't take long before connections began to surface. Wheeler's official congressional page and campaign sites had archived photos and listings of past donor events and fundraisers. Elliot went through each one with careful, relentless focus. Then one entry stood out. A charity art auction from last November, meant to raise funds for urban development, one of Wheeler's signature causes. Elliot recalled that same night. Caroline had gone to a networking event, saying she was there on behalf of her firm. And buried in a gallery on a local society blog, a photo showed champagne glasses mid-toast, and just behind them, Caroline, wearing an unmistakable emerald dress, standing close to Wheeler. The caption left her unnamed, but the image said enough. She hadn't told him she'd met Wheeler that night. But here she was, clear as day, in his presence. Elliot downloaded the image. It was a start, a single thread. Next, he went after guest lists from political fundraisers. These events often included names of prominent attendees in press kits and media blurbs. Wheeler had organized several of them in the past year. Elliot tracked down PDFs and promotional material, and there twice he saw her name. Once as a member of the organizing committee for a spring fundraiser, something she had never brought up. And again, listed as a guest at a closed-door donor dinner held in July. Organizing committee? Caroline had never expressed any serious interest in politics, or so she'd led him to think. And a private donor dinner? Those were usually reserved for big-time contributors. Why had she been there? Each new detail stung like a fresh wound, but it also hardened his resolve. He printed everything, highlighting her name each time it appeared. He started a physical file, a collection of evidence he could touch and organize, complementing what he already had saved digitally. His once orderly home office became a war room. Photos, printouts, notes filled with dates and locations, tacked, sorted, and cross-referenced. Day 3. That night over dinner, Caroline chatted breezily about minor work gossip, as if nothing in their world had shifted. Elliot smiled, nodded, played along. Afterward, he told her he had client work to finish for someone overseas. She didn't question it. If anything, she seemed slightly relieved. While she curled up in bed with her e-reader, he went into his office and locked the door behind him. He killed the lights, letting the monitors glow dimly in the dark. An old habit from his surveillance days to avoid attracting attention from outside. Tonight, he was after a new target. Caroline's work emails and files. It was dangerous territory, maybe even criminal. But the need for answers outweighed the risks. Her firm, HLT Designs, used a cloud-based platform for project management and expense tracking. He knew this because he'd often heard her complain about submitting receipts and logging hours online. Once, months ago, she'd asked him to help troubleshoot that very system on her laptop. He'd been close when she typed in her credentials. He closed his eyes, trying to relive the moment. She'd been frustrated, asking him how to attach scans, and typed in her password. It had been half a year ago, and though he hadn't seen every keystroke, he knew her habits. Caroline favored a few passwords she tweaked slightly from account to account. He scribbled down a few potential password combinations, one of them being her old college nickname followed by 123, the one that had unlocked her Lexus app before. With a calm hand, Elliot opened the HLT Design employee portal and navigated to Logan's profile. He typed in her company email, followed by his first guess. Incorrect. Access denied. He moved to the next variation, this time appending an E, a typical tweak she often used. The page stalled briefly before loading a new screen. He was in. A rush of adrenaline surged through him, a mix of guilt and satisfaction. He went straight to the expenses section. A table of reports appeared, sortable by date. He skimmed through the most recent ones quickly. A few entries immediately caught his attention, all approved and fully reimbursed. September 14th, taxi fare, labeled late client meeting, $52. October 5th, dinner, noted as client entertainment at Lakeshore Grill, $124. November 9th, car service fundraiser event, $67. December 7th, site visit Evanston condo project, $0, mileage only. January 18th, ride share tagged after hours meeting, $43. March 15th, just last week, taxi ride, reason listed as emergency site consultation, $48. Elliot's jaw locked as he flipped open a calendar to compare dates. Each one fell on a Thursday. Every single entry had been filed for a Thursday night, most time-stamped near or after 11 p.m., when considering the ride type or vague notes. Though worded to suggest business obligations, the recurring pattern now screamed something else. The Evanston condo project entry on December 7th leapt off the screen. That was the exact neighborhood where he'd found her meeting Wheeler months later in April. December 7th was probably another rendezvous, disguised as a legitimate site visit. Each report read like a quiet confession, hiding in plain sight. He downloaded all associated receipts and stored them locally. The taxi records included both pickup and drop-off addresses. March 15th, for instance, showed an 11:45 p.m. pickup at the location of Wheeler's congressional office downtown, a place Elliot knew, and drop-off at his and Caroline's home. She'd gone directly from Wheeler's office to their shared bed and billed her employer for the ride, calling it a consultation. His fingers trembled as fury bubbled under his skin. The brazenness of it nearly made him dizzy. She had spent the night with Wheeler, then returned to Elliot's bed, riding on the firm's dime. He tightened his fists and drew in a breath, steadying himself. If he'd harbored even the slightest doubt about her betrayal, the evidence in front of him shattered it. Caroline had twisted her career, her credentials, and her employer's trust into camouflage for her affair. That gave him a new strategy. Expense abuse, especially when tied to potential scandal, would not sit well with her company. He gathered all the digital receipts and printed out duplicates for his growing collection. Then, with methodical care, he assembled a timeline. Late September, falsely claimed client meeting, almost certainly with Wheeler. Early October, dinner charge, another covert outing. Early November, a fundraiser listed vaguely, almost certainly tied to Wheeler's political campaign. December 7th, the so-called condo visit in Evanston, thinly veiled cover for a liaison. January and March, repeating pattern, private encounters labeled as business emergencies. Each entry was more than just a financial record. It was another piece of the puzzle, now fitting together too neatly to ignore. Early December, an apartment in Evanston, maybe just a rendezvous spot, away from prying eyes, or perhaps a private getaway Wheeler had arranged. January, a meeting after regular hours, likely another secret encounter. March, near midnight, a supposed site visit, the most brazen fabrication yet, delivered straight from Wheeler's office, ending at their doorstep. And then April, and just yesterday, she hadn't even entered that one into the system. Given a little more time, she'd have come up with a rationale for it, too. Elliot noted the April meeting on his running list, hesitating before adding a question mark. By the fourth day, Elliot made a deliberate move. He reached out to someone he trusted, a former law enforcement contact. Sam Dwyer, once an FBI agent focused on political corruption, had transitioned into private investigations after leaving the bureau a few years earlier. They met for coffee in a quiet cafe in the Loop, choosing a secluded corner table to ensure privacy. Elliot knew Sam's discretion could be counted on. Their small talk covered familiar ground, life, work, until Elliot gently pivoted the conversation toward government affairs. "Let's say purely hypothetically," Elliot began, idly stirring his drink. Sam tilted his head, one eyebrow rising. "Hypothetically?" "Well, if it's something criminal, the FBI might take interest," Sam said. "But if it leans more toward ethical misconduct or inappropriate spending, then it's usually something the House Ethics Committee looks into, or sometimes the DOJ's Public Integrity Unit, depending on the severity." "Why do you ask?" Elliot measured his response, keeping his tone casual. "Just heard something through a friend at a law firm. A few irregularities in some expense records, possibly linking a company to a member of Congress. Might be trivial or not. I wasn't sure what to do with it. Thought maybe an anonymous tip to the media or a watchdog group could start the process. Sam gave a slow nod. Anonymous tips are common. If the claims are solid and well documented, especially if public funds or campaign contributions are involved, someone usually pays attention. And the press? They're often faster to respond than the agencies. An investigative journalist with the right info can cause a stir that forces action. But if you go that route, you'd better stay anonymous. Otherwise, you risk getting caught up in the fallout. Elliot took another sip, concealing a flicker of grim pleasure. Right, discretion matters. The person who found this wouldn't want to be connected to it. But what about others? Say someone at the company involved. If their name comes up, what then? Sam shrugged, the answer coming easily. If they were knowingly involved, they could be swept up in it. Jobs can be lost, reputations destroyed. If it's embezzlement or deception, the company might fire them. Maybe even pursue legal action. That's their call. But the politician? Even whispers of impropriety can be enough to derail a career. A criminal charge isn't even necessary. Public perception is everything. Just one headline linking a congressman to scandal, especially if there's an affair or hypocrisy at play, can be career-ending. He ended with a wince, the kind that understood how quickly such things spiral. Elliot gave a tight nod, his expression neutral. Interesting. Useful perspective. He added after a pause, purely hypothetical, of course. They parted shortly after. As Elliot stepped into the street, his thoughts were sharper, more assured. Sam had confirmed what he'd already begun to suspect. One anonymous submission to the right outlet could spark a scandal big enough to take both Caroline and Wheeler down. And if he played it smart, his name would never enter the picture. Days 5 and 7. In the days that followed, Elliot focused on sharpening the evidence he'd gathered and tightening control over his personal and financial life without raising alarms. On the 5th day, during an extended lunch break, he met with a divorce lawyer, Monica Fenton, a fierce and formidable attorney known for her relentless tactics in high-conflict cases. Through a discreet referral from a co-worker who had survived a difficult separation, Elliot arranged a same-day appointment by pretending he needed advice on behalf of someone else. Once inside Monica's private office, however, he dropped the act and laid everything on the table. His wife's affair, indications of financial impropriety, and his plan to file for divorce in the near future. He left the congressman unnamed, identifying him only as a potentially problematic third party whose involvement could carry legal and media consequences. Monica's interest sharpened visibly as she listened to the story unfold. The potential scandal seemed to energize her. She outlined immediate precautions he should take to protect both himself and his shared assets before confronting his wife. Illinois, she reminded him, was a no-fault divorce state. Infidelity alone wouldn't increase his settlement. But if Caroline had misused marital funds to support the affair, or if her choices jeopardized their finances with possible lawsuits or tax exposure, then he could act. In that case, Monica advised, he might justify freezing accounts or pushing for more favorable divorce terms. She also floated a bolder strategy, filing quickly and petitioning the court for exclusive residence of the marital home, along with a restraining order preventing Caroline from entering, something typically pursued in cases involving abuse or fraud. With the evidence Elliot had, Monica thought a judge might approve it, at least on a temporary basis. Elliot left her office dizzy with legal terminology and armed with a pile of ready-to-file documents. But he didn't submit them just yet. Timing mattered too much. Instead, he carefully stored the papers and began assembling a strategic checklist. The media tip-off, HR documentation, the divorce petition, the financial transitions, even new locks for the house. Everything had to fall into place on the same day. By the 7th day, Elliot had already contacted his bank and discreetly moved half of their shared savings into a new account under his sole ownership. In his mind, he was protecting what was rightfully his from the coming storm. Caroline remained unaware. She rarely reviewed the accounts regularly, and all alerts went to his email, a convenience they had set up long ago that now worked in his favor. He also gathered and duplicated every relevant financial record and credit card statement from the past year, combing them for any sign of the affair's expenses. But Caroline had been cautious. No obvious hotel bookings, no unexplainable jewelry purchases. It looked like Wheeler had picked up the tab for most things, or Caroline had paid in cash. The irony wasn't lost on him. Her attention to detail in betrayal matched her precision as an architect. Days 8 and 9. Elliot brought home a high-speed scanner from work, under the pretense of needing it for a late-stage project. Once the house was quiet and Caroline was asleep, he got to work. Every physical item he'd collected was digitized. Candid photos from public events, suspicious expense forms, cab receipts marked with telling locations and timestamps. Even a few flirtatious emails he had pulled from her old inbox archives. One, from Wheeler's personal Gmail, read plainly, "Looking forward to seeing you Thursday? B." He organized all the files into an encrypted folder on his laptop, naming it Final Exhibit. The name brought a grim smirk to his face. It was fitting. This wasn't just evidence for legal purposes. This was the closing argument of their life together, assembled for his own reckoning. Each night, he made sure backups were secure. One encrypted USB drive was locked in his office safe. Another was hidden in a safe deposit box he had recently opened in his name only. He kept reviewing the timeline, matching each piece of evidence with his calendar. He noted every Thursday over the past 6 months when Caroline had been conspicuously absent or arrived home late with excuses. The dates lined up all too neatly. In January, while he was attending a cybersecurity conference out of town, Wheeler had hosted a political fundraiser. That must have been why she had encouraged him to go. Another Thursday, when he'd been laid out with the flu and sedated with medication, she had vanished to the office to handle a supposed emergency. The reality of it all settled in, cold, calculated, and undeniable. It all traced back to that November art auction. One by one, the layers of deception came unraveled. Caroline had been leading a meticulously hidden double existence, and Blake Wheeler had been right there beside her in it. During those days, Elliot maintained a calm, composed exterior whenever he was around Caroline. It took effort. She behaved as though nothing in their life had shifted, though he started to notice a subtle increase in her attentiveness. Maybe it was guilt, compelling her to be more nurturing as he dealt with mounting work stress. One evening, she massaged his shoulders and casually noted how tense he felt, asking if something was bothering him. Elliot offered a tired grin and pinned it on his job. "Big client deadline. I'll be fine once it's behind me." She accepted the explanation without question and urged him to get some sleep. The irony was almost laughable. She had no idea that the project consuming his time was her. Still, there were close calls, moments where the truth nearly slipped through the cracks. One night, he found her up late, texting with a grin on her face. When he asked who it was, she replied without hesitation, "Oh, just Paige. Office drama, nothing big." He gave a nonchalant nod, though inside fury surged. He could easily picture Wheeler's name lighting up her screen. Another time, he walked in to see her looking up weekend destinations on her laptop. She quickly shut the browser window. "I was thinking maybe we could plan a little trip after things settle down at work," she said with innocent charm. Elliot played along, nodding politely, but in his mind he flagged it. A pretext for a romantic getaway with Wheeler? That trip was already dead in the water. All the while, Elliot remained a model of quiet, calculated restraint. In the solitude of night, surrounded by his growing collection of evidence, he allowed himself to feel the weight of the betrayal, just for a moment. He would linger over a photo of Caroline, laughing at that gala, standing next to Wheeler, or reread the falsified expense entries she had submitted, and the sting would hit him all over again. But he refused to drown in the pain. Instead, he funneled it into sharpening his plan. By the 10th day, he was confident that every piece was in place. A password-protected folder on his computer stored high-resolution scans of each incriminating file and photograph. He also assembled a printed version, organized and locked in a drawer for immediate access if needed. He had composed a carefully worded anonymous email for a journalist at the Chicago Tribune, a reporter known for exposing political scandals, someone who wouldn't be able to resist a tip that implicated a sitting congressman. Additionally, he prepared a separate dossier addressed to the head of human resources at HLT Designs, Caroline's employer. The packet outlined how one of their senior staff members had been submitting fraudulent expense claims. The letter inside was formal, unsigned, and voiced the concern of a supposed whistleblower, someone troubled by potential ethical violations that might be damaging the firm's reputation. Elliot double-checked his timeline as if it were a military operation. Thursday, 8 a.m. Send the anonymous tip and attached documents to the Tribune journalist's secure inbox. Thursday, 8:30 a.m. Dispatch a courier with the sealed HR packet to HLT Designs, scheduled to arrive by late morning. Thursday, 9 a.m. Go to the courthouse, file for divorce, and submit the injunction that Monica had prepared, ensuring Caroline would be served by that afternoon. Until noon, keep watch on the news cycle. With luck, the Tribune would already be pressing Wheeler for a statement, setting off a media storm in both their lives. Thursday, 3 p.m. Meet the locksmith to quietly change the locks at the house and organize Caroline's personal effects for removal. Thursday, 6 p.m. Arrange for Caroline to be served, either by a professional process server or in person. By then, she would be staggering from the fallout of the day, probably already suspended or let go, his name disgraced, and now, what remained of his personal life was about to collapse. After this, he would walk away for good. He drew in a long, deliberate breath as he saved the final adjustments to his plan. It was intricate, certainly, and reality was never without variables, but he had accounted for that. Each part of the operation was built to strike fast and decisively, leaving Caroline and Wheeler no room to respond. There would be no chance for them to sink their lies or destroy proof. By the time they understood what was happening, it would be irreversible. It was late Wednesday when Elliot found himself standing in the threshold of his home office, eyes scanning the familiar space. The desk was bare now, all documents either encrypted and stored or physically locked away. The walls were clean, devoid of any trace of the truth he had uncovered. To anyone who entered, it would appear as nothing more than the workspace of a precise, methodical man. Caroline was already asleep in the bedroom at the end of the hall, no doubt drained from another taxing workday. At least that's what she'd said. Elliot had spoken little over dinner, blaming his silence on exhaustion, and she'd accepted it without question. As he shut down his computer, his eyes landed on one last object, a compact digital camera tucked in a drawer, the same one he had used that rainy evening when this had all begun. He turned it on and scrolled through the images until he reached the one taken at the Sheridan parking lot. The photo was slightly out of focus, but clear enough. Caroline entering Wheeler's vehicle. Wheeler's BMW license plate reflecting brightly under a street lamp. Her face was partially visible through the window, enough for him to recognize her. It wasn't a crystal-clear image, but clarity wasn't the point. It served as a touchstone, a visual anchor to remind him why any of this had to happen. He placed the camera in his briefcase. Maybe he'd never need to reveal the photo. Still, knowing it existed brought a strange kind of reassurance. His private memory captured in pixels, the catalyst for everything that followed. He entered the bedroom and paused at the doorway, watching Caroline sleep. In the dim glow, her face looked serene, deceptively innocent. It struck him as almost surreal, how easily someone could betray and yet rest so peacefully. How much longer would that peace last, he wondered. A day, perhaps two. There was no satisfaction in what he was about to do. This wasn't revenge for its own sake. It was about truth and the consequences that must come with it. He slipped into bed quietly, careful not to wake her. Lying still, he stared upward at the ceiling, mentally rehearsing each step of tomorrow's sequence one last time. Beside him, Caroline stirred slightly in her sleep, then turned over and unconsciously laid her arm across his chest. The gesture froze him. He swallowed hard in the darkness, his throat tight. For a fleeting second, a memory flickered. The two of them, 5 years earlier, lying on a Maui beach, her asleep on his chest under the afternoon sun, a time when they were genuinely happy and entirely open with each other. That warm recollection collided with the bitterness that now filled him. But it was too late. He pushed the memory away, gently shifting her arm aside. Whatever love had once existed between them, she had corroded it. By this time tomorrow, Caroline Ward's world would start falling apart, fracturing detail by detail, falsehood by falsehood, and Elliot would be the hand behind the wrecking ball. With that final thought, he closed his eyes. The web had been spun with meticulous care, and he had traced every strand. In just a few hours, he would pull on the threads and watch the whole construct collapse. There was no undoing it now. It would be a clean strike. The chosen day arrived shrouded in a pale, misting rain. A gray Thursday morning that carried a heavy quiet, not like the stormy night of Elliot's revelation, but more like the stillness before a coming gale, the one he would soon unleash. Elliot awoke early. His pulse was calm, his thoughts sharp. Everything had been set in motion. At 7:55 a.m., he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. Caroline had left 30 minutes earlier, unaware, distracted. He had watched her drive away, her goodbye brief and perfunctory, probably anxious about another morning full of meetings. If only she had known what the morning would set in motion. In the shadows of his email drafts, an anonymous message sat waiting, crafted with precision under a pseudonym. It was addressed to Niles Gardner, a reporter for the Chicago Tribune, renowned for uncovering political corruption. The subject line was blunt and explosive. Urgent, allegations of misconduct involving Congressman Blake Wheeler. Elliot scanned through the message one last time, even though every word was etched into his memory. To the Tribune investigations team. Enclosed are documents implicating Congressman Blake Wheeler in an undisclosed romantic relationship with Caroline Ward, a Chicago professional employed by HLT Designs. The evidence suggests improper use of both corporate and potentially governmental funds to facilitate this affair. Within the files, you will find itemized expense reports from Ms. Ward's employer that overlap suspiciously with Wheeler's travel and fundraising appearances. There are photographs placing her at multiple high-dollar donor events for Representative Wheeler, events not reported on any official attendee list. This pattern hints at an ongoing breach of ethics, where Congressman Wheeler may have knowingly enabled or directly engaged in the misuse of private resources for personal liaisons. This tip is submitted in anonymity, in service of the public interest. The documentation speaks for itself. The message included 6 attachments. A PDF with selected pages from Caroline's expense logs, highlighted for significance. Photographic evidence placing her near Wheeler during key events. A comparative timeline of Wheeler's public appearances aligned with Caroline's claimed business expenses. A concise summary letter tying the narrative together. Elliot's finger paused briefly over the mouse before pressing send. The soft whoosh of the outbox confirmed it was gone. He watched the upload bar disappear, shut the laptop, and exhaled. The first shot had been fired. At 8:10 a.m., Elliot stepped out into a light drizzle and made his way a few blocks to a quiet street corner. There, he slipped a thick manila envelope into a public mailbox, one he'd never used before. The envelope was addressed meticulously in block letters to Marjorie Lyle, Director of Human Resources, HLT Designs. He had assembled its contents the night before. Hard copies of Caroline's red-flagged expenses, an unsigned letter detailing her apparent financial misconduct, and a USB drive containing the same digital records. He had mailed it from a random location to make sure it couldn't be traced back to him. It was sent via priority overnight. Marjorie would have it in her hands before noon. The second blow had been delivered. By 8:30 a.m., Elliot was driving through the heart of the city with measured calm. In the passenger seat lay a folder containing signed divorce forms, along with a temporary injunction Monica had rushed to prepare. Thanks to a favor Monica had called in, they'd secured an emergency ex parte hearing for 9:15 a.m. Elliot planned to have the judge approve both the filing and the injunction, legally barring Caroline from their shared residence, before she even knew what was happening. Traffic flowed steadily. Elliot glanced upward. The clouds hung heavy and dark, like steel above the skyline. A perfect backdrop, he thought, for the unraveling storm he had orchestrated. By 10 a.m., the consequences of his actions were already rippling across the city. separate scenes unfolding, yet all tied together by Elliot's hand. At HLT Designs, Caroline sat in her sleek glass office, reviewing blueprints alongside a summer intern. Her desk phone rang. "Caroline Ward," she said, voice crisp. "Caroline, this is Marjorie Lyle from HR. Could you come down to the main conference room, please?" Marjorie's tone was flat, cool, professional. Caroline felt a flicker of unease. "Of course. Is something wrong, Marjorie?" But the line had already gone dead. Perplexed, slightly unsettled, Caroline apologized to the intern and walked toward the elevators. A sudden summons from Human Resources without any explanation. She couldn't quite imagine the reason. Could it be about the new employee benefits package? Maybe a routine expense review? She had been meticulous with her reimbursements. A single bead of sweat traced down her spine as a sudden thought broke her focus. The costs. No, she'd already gotten approval for everything. Her reports were meticulous, every line item justified. It had to be something ordinary. She walked into the conference room and saw Marjorie Lyle already seated, flanked by two other individuals. One was the CFO of the company, and the other a stern-looking woman from legal. Documents were spread across the table in front of them. Caroline's chest tightened. "Please, take a seat, Caroline," Marjorie said, her voice clipped, mouth set in a hard line. At that same moment across the city, inside the offices of the Chicago Tribune, reporter Niles Gardner was deep into a stack of files forwarded by a concerned source. The email had landed in his inbox precisely at 8 a.m., and he had almost dismissed it as another hoax until he scanned the attachments. Now he was locked in, pursuing every lead. He'd quietly reached out to a former source inside HLT Design's accounting department, someone who had helped him with a previous investigation, to see if the expense records appeared legitimate. The contact's stunned reaction was all the confirmation he needed. By 10 a.m., Niles had briefed his editor and made calls to both Congressman Wheeler's office in Washington and his local office in Chicago, requesting a statement regarding allegations of misconduct and a secret affair. He also left a voicemail for Caroline Ward. He'd found her number through a professional listing and asked for a comment. No one had responded yet, but he hadn't expected them to. He knew this story had teeth, and once it broke, those involved would scramble. Meanwhile, just before 9 a.m. at the courthouse, Elliot stepped out of Judge Phelps's chambers, clutching a signed emergency injunction. The order gave him sole access to the Lincoln Park home and forbade Caroline from coming within 100 feet of it, citing urgent and sensitive circumstances. It was a bold move, but Monica had laid out a compelling case involving suspected financial wrongdoing and the risk of emotional fallout if Caroline discovered the divorce without warning. Judge Phelps, a no-nonsense veteran with little tolerance for domestic drama, gave a brusque nod and signed off without hesitation. The divorce petition had also been officially submitted to the clerk. As Elliot walked out into the morning air, a faint nausea rippled through him. There was no turning back now. Legally, he had initiated divorce proceedings against his wife. By 11 a.m., the first public shockwaves of the upheaval Elliot had triggered began to ripple outward. The Tribune published a breaking news bulletin online and pushed it across social media. Breaking. Tribune Investigations has obtained evidence suggesting Congressman Blake Wheeler, D. Illinois, may have engaged in an undisclosed affair involving financial impropriety. Story developing. At Wheeler's district office downtown, his aides had just wrapped up a tense call with Niles Gardner. Behind closed doors, the congressman sat in silence, pale and rattled, as his chief of staff repeated the journalist's blunt inquiries. Wheeler's thoughts raced wildly. He'd believed his connection with Caroline was under wraps. Quiet talk among trusted confidants, never substantiated. But now expense reports? Who had access to those besides Caroline? Maybe someone inside her firm's finance team? Could she have leaked them herself? No, unthinkable. She was just as exposed as he was. Then who? Someone in her orbit? A whistleblower? He muttered a curse. Maybe this was political. The rumors of a primary challenge had been growing louder. Perhaps an opponent had gotten hold of something, and now the attack had begun. What do we say, Blake? The chief of staff's voice cut through Wheeler's spiraling thoughts, snapping him back to the present. They're demanding a statement by noon. Wheeler loosened his tie, trying to slow the rising panic. Deny it all, he said firmly. Say the claims are baseless. I have no knowledge of any inappropriate conduct. He dabbed his forehead with a trembling hand. Call my lawyer. I need to know exactly what evidence they think they've got. He understood the danger of an outright denial if they were sitting on proof, but buying time was critical now, and he had to get in touch with Caroline, fast. Pulling out his personal phone, Wheeler dialed her number. It rang, and rang again. Still no answer. On the fourth ring, she finally picked up, her voice hushed. Blake, I'm in a meeting. I can't talk right now. Caroline, listen. He cut in, his voice low but clipped with tension. The Tribune reached out to my office. They're working on a piece. They mentioned documentation, your expense records, and us. His words hung heavy in the silence that followed. They know, he added, or they're damn close to it. The story could go live today. A sharp intake of breath echoed on the line. What? How do they? She began, barely above a whisper. Turning her head away from the HR team seated across the table, Caroline struggled to steady her voice. She glanced down and froze. In front of her, Marjorie had just pushed forward a thick stack of printed sheets. Expense reports, hers. With her name, her annotations, her signature, proof she believed was buried. A chill spread through her chest. Blake, she said shakily, I think my company knows too. I'm in an HR meeting right now. They've got my reports laid out in front of me. There was a pause as Wheeler processed the blow. This wasn't just a press leak. It had hit both ends, her employer and the media, at the same time. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone had set this in motion. But who? You didn't tell anyone about us, right? He asked, voice tight, panic slipping in. Of course not, she whispered, hurt flashing in her tone. She glanced back at the HR team, watching her closely. Mouthing just a minute, she stood and stepped aside, pretending to take a routine call. No one stopped her. Why would I risk exposing this? She continued. I stand to lose just as much as you do, Blake. Someone else had to have found out. Maybe someone at my office tipped off the Tribune? Or maybe it's politically motivated? I don't know. Her thoughts were racing, searching for any explanation that didn't point back at her, any scapegoat that would keep her guilt at bay. Back at the table, the CFO exchanged a look with Marjorie as Caroline whispered in the corner. They didn't need to hear the full conversation. Her tone said enough. Meanwhile, Wheeler cursed quietly on the other end of the line. This was planned, he muttered. Whoever's behind this, they timed it perfectly. Don't say a word to the press. Deny everything on your end, too. Just say it was a misunderstanding, he urged quietly. I'll try to get ahead of it. He hesitated, lowering his voice to a murmur. We'll talk again soon. Hang in there. The line went dead before she could respond. Caroline drifted back to the conference table, her movements stiff and unsteady. She collapsed into a chair, the walls of the room seeming to press in around her. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears like a drum. The CFO broke the silence, his voice cold and sharp. Caroline, we've come into possession of documents indicating you've been submitting fraudulent expense claims, billing the company for personal activities. He tapped the papers in front of him with deliberate weight. These records suggest a troubling pattern. Late-night taxi rides, dinners, and off-site engagements that don't correspond to any known client work. However, he added, his tone growing sour, they do seem to coincide with events involving Congressman Wheeler. The way he spoke the name, Wheeler, was loaded with accusation. Caroline's throat tightened. Her eyes flicked to the stack of evidence, each page landing like a hammer on her credibility. It's not what you think, she said, barely able to get the words out. Marjorie raised a hand, silencing her. Don't, she said flatly. This packet arrived anonymously this morning. It speaks volumes on its own. She casually turned a few pages. We see charges for outings that appear clearly personal, particularly late at night, and you've disguised them as business expenses. Taxi receipts from a congressman's office to your home, logged as site visits. Fundraiser attendance paid with corporate funds. Caroline, this goes beyond poor judgment. This may constitute fraud. Tears began to sting Caroline's eyes. I can explain, she said in a strained voice, barely above a whisper. Panic gripped her as the gravity of the situation settled over her like a heavy cloak. Her career, her name, everything she'd worked for, crumbling. The firm's attorney spoke next, voice even but unyielding. There's no innocent explanation for this. Misappropriating company resources and falsifying official reports are serious offenses. And, the woman added, eyes narrowing, based on the phone call you just took, this situation may soon be very public. A flush of shame crawled up Caroline's neck. One tear slid down her cheek. I never wanted the company to be involved, she whispered, her voice breaking. It wasn't supposed to get to this point. Marjorie's face was unreadable, carved in stone. Effective immediately, you're suspended without pay while we conduct a full investigation and financial audit, she said. We'll be combing through your communication records and expense reports. And if the evidence holds, and frankly it does, you'll be terminated for cause. She pushed a printed notice across the table toward Caroline. This is your official suspension. We'll need your company ID and laptop now. Suspended. Probably facing termination, maybe even legal action. Caroline's head swam. Her fingers fumbled as she reached into her handbag. She pulled out her ID card, her smiling face captured forever in better times. It felt like mockery now. She laid it on the table. Her hands followed with the laptop, gently placing it down. The screen, dark and blank, caught her faint reflection, ghostly and hollow. We'll walk you to your office so you can gather your personal items, Marjorie said, her voice slightly softer but still commanding. It's best you do it quickly and quietly. Caroline gave a slight dazed nod. Inside her, shame clashed with dread, a storm of emotion that left her breathless. The consequences were crashing down all at once. Too many, too fast. Her career was unraveling, the Tribune was circling like vultures, Wheeler was spiraling, and her chest tightened painfully. And Elliot? He probably didn't know yet, but that would change soon enough if this went public. The thought of her husband discovering the truth this way, in the most degrading, sensational manner, made her stomach churn. She had to reach him before the headlines did. Maybe there was still time to save something between them. She couldn't let it end like this. Not without trying. Marjorie rose, reading Caroline's stunned silence as the end of their meeting. That concludes the review. You'll be contacted when the audit wraps up. I'm sorry it had to come to this. The words were mechanical, stripped of warmth or comfort. I understand, Caroline whispered, her voice barely audible. Her hands, unsteady, reached for her purse. An HR assistant soon appeared, and Caroline was led through the office halls like a reprimanded schoolgirl. From behind glass partitions and half walls, co-workers peeked out, curious, cautious. Gossip spreads like wildfire in a corporate setting, and the sparks had clearly already caught. Caroline didn't lift her gaze. Her cheeks burned and her legs felt numb. Everything she had so carefully separated in her life, work, marriage, secrets, had collapsed in mere hours. By 11:45 a.m., she was outside the HLT Design headquarters, standing on the gray pavement with a banker's box clutched in her arms. Inside were fragments of her professional world, framed photos, a ceramic coffee cup, a handful of paperbacks. The sky above was thick with clouds, mirroring the gloom inside her. She placed the box gently in her car and sat in the driver's seat, her fingers curled around the steering wheel, unmoving. And that's when the tears came. Deep, racking sobs that made her whole body shake and steamed the windows until everything was blurred in gray. When her crying finally eased, she reached for her phone. There was a missed call and voicemail, an unknown number. Probably the reporter from the Tribune. She erased the message without pressing play. She couldn't face journalists. She could barely face her own reflection. Instead, she dialed Elliot. The call rang. Once, twice, a third time. Then voicemail. She ended the call without speaking. What could she possibly say? Hi, love. I got suspended because I've been sleeping with a congressman and now it's front-page news. A bitter laugh broke through her exhaustion at the hideous absurdity of it. No, she wasn't ready for that conversation. She needed clarity. She needed to know what he'd seen, what he hadn't. Wheeler, she should try Blake again. Maybe he had a plan. Something to contain the damage. She dialed. No answer. He was likely locked in frantic meetings with aides and attorneys. Caroline had never felt more isolated. She scrubbed the tears from her face and turned the key in the ignition. As the car pulled into traffic, her phone vibrated again. A news alert. She blinked through her watery vision and read the headline. Architects' midnight meetings tied to congressmen, exclusive from the Tribune. Her hands trembled as she tapped the notification. The article loaded. Her blood ran cold. Chicago Tribune. Breaking news. 11:58 a.m. Architects' midnight excursions. Ethics scandal brewing around Congressman Wheeler. A scandal is beginning to unfold. Leaked materials obtained by the Tribune implicate Representative Blake Wheeler, Democrat of Illinois, in a concealed affair with a Chicago-based architect. These revelations have sparked scrutiny over potential ethical violations and possible misappropriation of funds. Financial records from HLT Designs, a respected architectural firm, reveal that Caroline Ward, 34, a senior architect on their staff, submitted expenses for travel and events that appear to coincide with Wheeler's political functions, campaign events and private meetings among them. Authorities are now investigating whether those trips were actually personal engagements masked as business, and whether any public or firm-related funds were improperly diverted in the process. Wheeler's team has refused to issue a response to the allegations, but insiders suggest a formal inquiry by the House Ethics Committee is likely on the horizon. Meanwhile, HLT Designs has confirmed that an internal investigation regarding one of its employees is currently underway. Political commentators emphasize that even the perception of wrongdoing in a case like this can be career-ending for a public figure like Wheeler. Further developments are expected. Caroline's head spun. They had named her by full name. They had named her firm. Every part of it was out in the open now. The article included a photo. Wheeler was captured at a charity gala, mid-laugh, and just behind him stood Caroline, her face angled slightly in his direction, champagne flute lifted near her lips. A bold red circle around her face left no room for doubt. It was unmistakably her. The recognition slammed into her, and a fresh swell of tears rose to the surface. With a choked gasp, Caroline hurled her phone onto the passenger seat as if it had burned her skin. This wasn't private anymore. It was everywhere, irreversible. She felt physically ill. And Elliot. Even if he hadn't known before, he'd know now. The push notifications must be lighting up his screen. His co-workers surely would be piecing it all together. Caroline Ward, the woman in the headlines, was his wife. She imagined his inbox filling with messages, some curious, others pitying. How could she even begin to explain herself to him? What words could possibly fix this? She had to reach him, now, before more damage was done, if there was even a thread of hope left to hold on to. Brushing away her tears, Caroline started driving. Her route was aimless at first, but then she turned the car toward home, determined. I have to see Elliot, she told herself. I have to try to explain, plead if I must. Maybe he hasn't seen it yet. Maybe I can still be the one to tell him. It was a desperate, flickering hope, but it was all she had. By mid-afternoon, around 3 o'clock, a soft drizzle had returned, misting the windshield as Caroline's Lexus crept down the familiar street where tall trees lined the pavement like sentinels. Her heart thundered in her chest. She silently rehearsed what she might say. Elliot, I did something terrible. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't think it would end up like this. I'm sorry, so sorry. But no matter how she phrased it, the words felt hollow. His car, a silver Mercedes, was already in the driveway. He was home early. Of course he was. She recalled that today, Elliot had scheduled his meetings and errands for the morning. He would have been free by early afternoon. Inside the house, he had not been idle. Roughly 15 minutes before Caroline's arrival, the locksmith he had hired had completed the task of replacing every lock on the exterior doors. Caroline no longer had access to her own home. In the entryway, several cardboard boxes sat neatly stacked and sealed. Inside were her belongings, clothing, shoes, toiletries, anything personal, packed with quiet finality. Elliot had done it all quickly, methodically, and without pause after returning from the courthouse. He didn't want to see any of her things when she walked through that door. In the living room, he stood with his phone in hand, waiting. He had just finished reading the Tribune's latest revision. Caroline's name now headlined the piece. It was catching fire quickly. Even the ticker tape on national news was running with it. A cold sense of fulfillment washed over him. This was exactly how he had planned it. His phone buzzed, a message from Monica. Tribune article hits hard. Filing went cleanly. Server is ready when you are. Let me know if you want him to handle it or if you'll deliver it yourself. Be careful. Elliot had already decided. He would make the delivery in person. He needed to witness the moment Caroline understood that he knew everything, and that there was no way back from here. Through the front window, he spotted her powder blue Lexus turning onto the street. He slipped the phone into his pocket and stepped into the entryway, clutching a manila envelope. Inside were the divorce papers and a copy of the court-ordered injunction. From outside, he heard the car door shut, then brisk footsteps approaching. The front doorknob rattled once, twice, unsuccessful. Caroline's frustration spiked as the key refused to turn. She tried again, jiggling the handle with rising panic. Was it stuck? And then the Tribune article came rushing back. Something about a restraining order. Had Elliot already gone through with it? She knocked, gently at first, then more urgently. "Elliot?" she called, her voice thin with desperation. "Please, are you there? We need to talk." Only the steady rhythm of rain answered. Then at last, the deadbolt clicked sharply. The door creaked open just a few inches, held fast by the chain. Through the narrow gap, she saw him. Elliot's face was blank and his eyes steady, his demeanor unnervingly composed. A knot of hope and dread tightened in Caroline's chest. "Elliot, thank God!" she gasped. "Listen, I need to—" He cut her off quietly, his tone flat and final. "You're not coming inside, Caroline." Her breath caught. Raindrops clung to her lashes as she stared in disbelief. "What? Elliot, please, it's pouring out here. I just dash. He released the chain and swung the door open, but planted himself firmly in the frame, barring her entry. One hand held the door. The other held the envelope, her name printed cleanly on the label. She saw it and her heart dropped. Still, she tried to smile, though her voice trembled. "Look, I know things are out there and they look bad. But I can explain, just not here, not like this." "Can we please just—" "Take it," Elliot interrupted. He extended the envelope to her. His expression didn't shift. No fury, no sorrow. Just a chilling stillness. Nothing but cold resolve. Caroline remained frozen, unmoving. So he let the envelope drop, landing soundlessly by her shoes. She startled. Slowly, cautiously, she bent down and picked it up, her fingers trembling with a sense of dread. She slipped the papers from within. Her eyes scanned the first page, widening. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Her name listed below, respondent. Legal language leapt off the page, irretrievable breakdown. Another sheet followed, a court-issued directive barring her from the home. The tears came fast, unbidden, clouding her sight. "You?" Her voice rasped. "You're divorcing me?" Reality slammed into her like a wave. Elliot knew. Maybe he'd known for longer than she could guess. And this wasn't just about leaving. He had taken deliberate, irreversible steps, shutting her out, sealing the end. Her lips quivered. Did you do all of this?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "The Tribune, my job." It was a question drenched in shock, part accusation, part plea. Elliot's jaw stiffened, almost too subtly to notice. His voice was quiet, firm. "Yes, I did." Caroline swayed, reaching for the doorframe to steady herself. For a fleeting second, fury sparked through her heartbreak. "You've destroyed me!" she snapped. "My work, my name, everything!" "Why didn't you come to me first? We could have—" Her voice caught painfully. "We could have handled this behind closed doors. But instead Her voice faltered. "You blew everything apart?" Elliot's eyes burned with intensity, finally emotion cracking through his calm. "Handled it quietly," he said, his tone laced with bitterness. "After you humiliated me in front of everyone? After you turned our life, your company, into the perfect cover for your affair?" He slowly shook his head. "No, Caroline, that wasn't enough. You tore apart our marriage, our family. You don't get to walk away with a soft apology and a reset button." Rain mixed with her tears as they rolled down her cheeks. "I know I hurt you," she whispered through sobs. "I know, but this—" She raised the envelope limply. It's so final." Elliot didn't move. He stood solid, unshaken in the doorway, as immovable as stone. "It is final," he said. You sealed that fate the moment you got into his car. Caroline collapsed inwardly. Words tried to form, protests, pleas, explanations. It had been a mistake, she wanted to say. She hadn't meant for any of it to happen. She was lost, vulnerable, weak. Anything to undo the damage. But the look on Elliot's face told her none of it would matter. His trust was dead and buried. And this legal execution was the cost. She tried once more, barely audible. Elliot, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I never wanted... A sob broke through her final sentence. I never wanted to lose you. For the briefest instant, Elliot's face betrayed him, just a flicker of something raw beneath the surface. A wound not fully closed, but in a heartbeat, he masked it again. You lost me a long time ago, he said softly. It just took me a little time to realize it. Caroline's hand flew to her lips to smother a sob. This was the end. Their marriage crumbled like brittle paper, unraveling right there in the rain at their doorway. Elliot took a step back. There's nothing else to talk about, he said. You should leave. His gaze shifted, not meeting hers anymore, drifting past her down the steps. I had your things boxed up, he added, motioning toward the side of the porch. Only then did Caroline notice the two taped-up boxes tucked beneath the awning's meager shelter. You can take them whenever you're ready, he said. After tomorrow, they'll be moved to storage. Her eyes followed the direction of his gesture. Her breath caught. All of it, her life with him, reduced to cardboard and duct tape. There was something brutally conclusive about that image. It rattled her to her bones. Where am I even supposed to go? She murmured, brushing her sleeve across her soaked face. Elliot's voice remained cold and detached. Not my problem, he said. Maybe write to your congressman. Each word landed like a slap. Caroline flinched, closing her eyes as though the blow were physical. She had nothing left to say. No clever retort, no place to retreat to. At best, she might be able to sleep on a friend's couch. Wheeler was certainly off limits now. He was likely already putting distance between them to protect his own reputation. Elliot, sensing she was done fighting, gave a short nod. Goodbye, Caroline. And just like that, he stepped back and shut the door, hard and final. She remained motionless, staring at the door he'd just closed, rain drenching her hair, her clothes, her skin. She wanted to scream, to beat on the door until her fists split open, to rewind time and change the story. But some truths couldn't be undone. Eventually, holding the envelope in one trembling hand and what little pride she had left in the other, she lifted the boxes one at a time and loaded them into the back of her car. Every movement felt heavier than it should. As she reversed out of the driveway, she turned her head for a final glimpse. The house, once warm, once hers, looked dim now, shadowed and unfamiliar through the rain-blurred window. Once it had been filled with laughter. Now it seemed to reject her presence entirely. Grief swelled in her throat, threatening to overtake her, but she forced it down. She pressed the gas pedal. There was no going back. Whatever came next, she'd have to face it, alone. Inside, Elliot remained by the door, eye pressed to the peephole until her car vanished at the corner. He exhaled slowly, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. His hands trembled, residue from the confrontation, adrenaline still surging. He'd kept himself from facing her until now. This had been the first and last time. And now it was done. The house felt frozen in time, hushed and unmoving, except for the faint, rhythmic ticking of a hallway clock. Elliot stood still at the entrance, unmoving for a while, drawing in a slow, deliberate breath. It was finished. No more deceit, no more pretending. He had executed the final step with cold precision, and what followed was no longer his burden to carry. The quiet in the house was uncanny, hollow, yet strangely purged. He glanced at the pile of boxes near the wall, Caroline's remnants, the pieces she hadn't bothered to reclaim. They'd be gone soon enough. For now, Elliot simply lingered in the entryway, letting himself exhale. A weighty period of his life had ended, and whatever awaited, he'd confronted on his own terms. The fallout arrived by Friday morning, and with it, Caroline Ward's name emblazoned across the front page of the Chicago Tribune. The headline screamed in stark letters, Architect's Midnight Excursions Linked to Congressman. The expose explained how an anonymous informant had triggered revelations of an illicit affair. and serious ethical breaches, shaking the foundations of both a respected architect's firm and the reputation of Congressman Blake Wheeler. By that point, Wheeler's office had gone radio silent. He had pulled out of a scheduled public event that morning, instructing his staff to release no statements as the scandal snowballed. T Designs, the firm where Caroline had held a senior role, issued a blunt midday announcement. Caroline Ward had been dismissed for breaching professional ethics and misappropriating firm funds. The scandal dominated conversations from Chicago to the Capitol. From the pristine quiet of his newly leased apartment, just a couple of blocks from the house he once called home, Elliot watched the final pieces of his plan slot into place. He had resolved never to sleep another night under that old roof after Caroline walked out the previous evening. He'd locked up the Lincoln Park house, left a set of keys on the kitchen counter for his attorney, and walked out without a second glance. Anticipating this transition, he'd secured a fully furnished loft the week before. A place untouched by regret, built for new beginnings. In the stillness before sunrise, he sat by the towering windows of that high-rise apartment, city lights twinkling like restless stars below. He poured a straight bourbon into a glass and sipped slowly, letting the liquid warmth slide through his chest like quiet fire. His laptop rested open on the glass coffee table before him, displaying the digital front page of the Tribune. He skimmed the article again, the leaked financial documents, the swift response from her firm, and the increasing demands for a formal congressional ethics investigation. One section speculated that Wheeler's political career might be in jeopardy, noting that he was reportedly considering resigning from a key committee role. Elliot didn't revel in watching someone else fall from grace, but a grim sense of justice lingered. Wheeler would not emerge unscathed. Setting the glass down, Elliot tapped an icon linked to a secure flash drive plugged into his laptop. The familiar folder appeared. Final exhibit. Inside was everything: the images, the financial records, the timeline. Each file a building block in the story that had now unraveled in full view. He scanned the file names one last time, remembering the endless nights spent piecing them together. Their purpose had been fulfilled. With a soft exhale, he closed the folder, then gently shut the laptop. In its dark screen, he caught his own reflection, framed by the faint shimmer of dawn beginning to rise behind him. A quiet clarity washed over him. Not just relief, but vindication. For the first time in a long while, Elliot felt truly still inside. He leaned back and watched the first light of morning dissolve the final shadows of the night. In just a few hours, he would make his usual commute to the office. There were clients awaiting his counsel, a team relying on his direction, and a life that, despite everything, still required living. Legal paperwork remained to finalize the divorce. No doubt he'd have to steel himself for the inevitable stares and whispers, people connecting him to the scandal now circulating. And yet none of that truly disturbed him. The most painful part had already passed. He had stared betrayal in the face and answered it with unflinching justice. He rose slowly, drifting toward the open kitchen. There he refilled his glass with another splash of bourbon. He suspected that before the day was over, he'd hear from friends. The kind who'd seen the headlines and suddenly connected the dots. Caroline Ward was his wife. He was already rehearsing what he'd say, something brief perhaps about the divorce and a polite request for privacy. Most, he believed, would respect that boundary. Elliot returned to the living room, setting the glass down on the table beside him. On impulse, he reached for the flash drive labeled Final Exhibit. That small object contained the results of 10 days' careful work, a digital arsenal he'd assembled and used with precision. He rolled it between his fingers, pensive. Maybe he'd wipe it clean soon, or perhaps stow it somewhere secure like a safety deposit box. Its purpose had already been served. He felt no need to hold on to it. There was little fear of repercussions. He had taken every precaution, remaining untraceable and maneuvering carefully within the ambiguous edges of legality. He placed the drive back down and took a measured sip of bourbon. Far below, early risers were already on the move, their umbrellas bobbing along slick sidewalks, coffee in hand. The city, as always, continued without pause, utterly indifferent to the personal storm that had overtaken his recent days. And Elliot, to his surprise, realized he too was ready to let it all go. The dominant feeling now wasn't grief or fury, it was relief. He hadn't collapsed under the weight of her betrayal. Instead, he had responded with clarity and resolve, and through that, he had rediscovered his own sense of integrity and strength. There was pain, of course, the ache of losing a woman he once adored, the mourning of the life they had built together. But that hurt was softened by the certainty that he hadn't let it consume him. He had stood his ground, met the betrayal with intelligence, and delivered justice on his own terms. He walked to the window, one hand slipping into his pocket as he gazed at the slowly stirring city. The rain had stopped, and the sky was beginning to clear, pale streaks of sunlight breaking through the thinning clouds. In the distance, Lake Michigan stretched out calm and steel gray. Briefly, Elliot's thoughts drifted to Caroline. Where might she be now? Perhaps curled up at a friend's house, drowning in remorse. Or maybe staying with her parents, trying in vain to explain what couldn't be justified. He didn't envy her. If anything, part of him felt sorry for her. For the fall, for the disgrace. But then came the memories. The lies she told with such ease. The nights she kissed him after being with Wheeler. The sheer audacity of her deceit. Whatever sympathy he might have felt was quickly replaced by a sense of justice served. And Wheeler, no doubt barricaded in his D.C. home or office, trying to devise some last-ditch effort to salvage his reputation, or preparing to bow out in disgrace. Elliot found he didn't care much what happened to the man. If asked behind closed doors, he'd simply say Wheeler had it coming, for exploiting his position and crossing a line he never should have approached. Let the public judge him now. With a final sip of bourbon, Elliot welcomed the slow burn in his throat. The tension he'd carried for days was finally slipping away. This chapter was done. Whatever anyone thought of his actions, however extreme they seemed, he knew one thing with clarity. He hadn't let betrayal walk away without consequence. He hadn't lifted a hand or broken a single law. All he did was wield the truth, sharp, measured, and devastating. In its own way, the act had a certain grace, a clean and deliberate answer to a grim reality. He set the empty glass aside and noticed that his laptop screen had gone dark. The Tribune homepage now vanished into blackness. In that dark reflection, he caught sight of himself. Upright, composed, no longer burdened by doubt. There would be quiet, solitary moments ahead, he knew. The house would change hands. The divorce would move forward. Parts of his life would need rebuilding piece by piece. But this time it would be rebuilt honestly, with no lies lurking in the background. A small, tired smile crept across Elliot's face. As his eyes settled once more on the closed laptop and the flash drive beside it, objects that had held the power of this entire ordeal, now rendered still. He had never accepted the role of victim. Instead, he executed a calculated and final reckoning that left nothing unresolved. Turning from the table, he made his way to the bedroom to prepare for the day ahead. Light from the morning sun spilled softly around the edges of the curtains. Inside, something shifted, a heaviness gone, and in its place, the faint stirrings of hope. No further confrontations would come. No apologies would be sought, and none would be offered. In the narrative that had been Elliot and Caroline, he had crafted the conclusion with clarity. Truth unveiled and justice delivered. And as Elliot Ward walked into the promise of a new morning, he did so free of doubt, vindicated by the truth. A man betrayed who carved his own path to justice, never once turning back.